Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for the IELTS reading question type matching headings lesson. I'm really excited to get started on this lesson because the matching headings question type is really one that students struggle with, and they often approach it in the incorrect way. So before we get started, I would just like to go over a brief overview of what we'll be looking at so that we can get prepared. First of all, it's very important to understand what a heading is. So headings are short sentences that summarize the information in a given paragraph. So if we look here on the right-hand side, you'll see paragraphs. I'll just get my mouse. You'll see paragraphs here, and they're separated into sections. And on the left-hand side here, we see a list of headings. Now, these headings are a summary of the information, and they contain general ideas and not supporting details. This is probably the most important point of the matching headings question type, because a lot of students feel that they need to read all of these details in the paragraphs in order to understand which heading is best, and that is simply not the case. We just need to look for the general idea. So in this lesson, we will tackle this question type. I'll give you step-by-step instructions. We'll go through an example together, and hopefully you'll be able to master this question type. Okay, let's get started. All right, so here you'll see the 5 steps that we're going to follow in our step-by-step example. I would just like to give you a brief overview and an explanation on each one. First off, the first 3 steps are going to be our preparation work. So this is going to be done before we even read the passage. And then steps 4 and 5 are going to deal with the passage itself. So first, we're going to read each heading just to get an idea for what the headings are about. And then second, we're going to find keywords. Now, with time and practice, you can actually combine steps 1 and 2. The second step is all about finding pertinent information. This could include names, places, or dates. So we'll go through that as well. Step 3 is my favorite step and arguably the most important step for this question type. It is noting the similarities and differences between the headings. This is really important because a common trick to the matching headings question type is to include very similar headings in order to confuse test takers. And that's one of the reasons why this specific question type, the matching headings, is one of the most difficult. So we'll spend some time here. Then, once the preparation work is done, we're going to look at steps 4 and 5. Fourth, we're going to read only the first and last sentences of each paragraph. Remember earlier I talked about how test takers are confused and they read all of the information. We're not going to do that because that's going to waste our time, and we want to maximize our efficiency. And then number 5 is an optional step, but I'll take you through it anyway because it's good practice. And it's just making margin notes by the paragraphs as we read the first and last sentences. So we can also combine steps 4 and 5 with practice as well. And you'll just want to make ideas for which heading could be the answer for each paragraph. So don't worry, I'll take you through all of these steps, but this is just an outline of what we'll be looking at today. All right, so as promised, here we are with our step-by-step example. Now, before we get started with step 1, I just want to call your attention to the directions. Remember, it's always important to read the directions before attempting the exam. It'll actually give us a lot of useful information. So first off, always remember that for the matching headings question type, you're going to write the correct Roman numeral in your test booklet and not any words. Very important. And you'll see for this question type, you'll see a list of headings, usually around 5 to 9 headings, and they're in Roman numerals, okay? And based off of our expertise with this exam, you're most likely going to have more headings than questions. So for example, if you see here, let me clear our screen, we have questions 2 through 5 because 1 has been done for us. So we have 4 questions to answer and more than 4 headings, okay? Lastly, for the instructions, you'll notice that it doesn't say that a heading can be used more than once. This is very important because we can already eliminate answer V, so 5, Roman numeral V, collections of factual evidence. Since it's been used for the example, it's not going to be used in our questions. So you see why I've crossed that out, and we will not need to worry about that. So it's a really good clue, and it'll help you maximize your efficiency. So always make sure to read the directions. All right, so moving on to step 1, we're going to read the headings, and we're going to get a general idea of what each heading is about. Remember earlier I told you that with time and practice, you can combine step 1 and step 2. But for this step-by-step example, we will break it down and do step 1 on its own. So we're just going to read the headings. We see commercial pressures on people in charge. 2, mixed views on current changes to museums. So already we know something will be talking about museums and perhaps the people who work in those museums. 3, interpreting the facts to meet visitor expectations. Again, visitors who go to museums. 4, the international dimension. 5, collections of factual evidence. 6, fewer differences between public attractions. And 7, current reviews and suggestions. So basically we know we're going to be looking at museums, perhaps people who work in them, people who visit the museums, maybe some collections, museums on the international spectrum or dimension, and also looking at public attractions. So we have a nice idea. Okay, now step 2, we want to find keywords. So ask yourself this question: what would you pull out as a keyword for each heading? Why are we doing this step? We're basically doing this step to get a better idea of each heading and what it's about, and this will help us when we approach the passage. And it'll give us a good idea of dates or places or people. And this is also very important because remember, the trick to this question type is understanding the difference between very similar headings. Okay. So let's start with number 1, commercial pressures on people in charge. Now, if you think about this, you want to say, which words are important enough to be the main idea? So I'm not looking at detail, I'm not looking for specific things. I would say pressures and people, okay? You don't want to underline commercial because commercial is describing pressures and in charge is describing people. So we just want to keep it simple, pressures and people. Okay, number 2, mixed views on current changes to museums. Here I would say views and changes, because we already know that museums are part of the general idea, so no need to underline museums. The mixed adjective describes views, so there's no need to underline mixed, and current describes changes, so that's not necessary. Okay, number 3, interpreting the facts to meet visitor expectations. Here I would say interpreting, meet, and expectations, okay? Because yes, we're looking at expectations, but it's also good to look at interpreting. Okay, 4, the international dimension. This is quite short, so I would say the most important thing to underline here is the fact that it's international. 5, collections of factual evidence. I want to look at collections and evidence. 6, fewer differences between public attractions. Again, differences and attractions. And 7, current reviews and suggestions, reviews and suggestions. Okay, now let's check our answers. I will clear our screen just to give us a better idea. And if you click here to show keywords, you see the keywords that were chosen with an explanation. And this is basically what we have just done. Okay. It's really interesting to look at number 4 because some people might say international is an adjective and describes dimension, and that is the case. But since it's such a short sentence, it's important to pull out this key feature from the headline. This is the key feature. We see that it's a dimension, but international is more of an important word. All right, so now that we've done steps 1 and 2, let's go ahead and move on to step 3. Now, we're going to note the similarities and differences of each heading. And again, like I said, this is very important and one of the reasons why people struggle with this question type. So think about this. Which of these headings are similar and could cause you to make a mistake? If you think about this, looking at all of these headings talked about in the previous step, we see number 4, the international dimension. This is an important thing to keep in mind because it is one of the shortest questions. And so this is a nice clue for us. It's the only one that mentions an international setting, and this may be the easiest information to find in the passage if necessary. So always keep a note and always keep a lookout for the shortest heading. Okay, then secondly, I'd like to bring your attention to number 7, current reviews and suggestions, and number 2, mixed views on current changes to museums. Now this is deceiving, and this is what I mean by headings that are similar, because we see mixed views on current changes and current reviews and suggestions. So these are purposely included to confuse the reader, and you want to make a note of this. You see current is used twice. One is talking about reviews and suggestions, while the other is talking more about opinions. This is where synonyms are helpful, because if you see views, do not get confused with reviews. And think of another way to say views. It could be your opinion, your beliefs, your mindset, anything like this. So keep a note for these two. And then lastly, I just want to call your attention to number 5 here, collections of factual evidence. Remember, that has already been used in the example you see here, 5. So if you see the example is used and you know that you can only use each number once, do not even waste your time, and you can eliminate that already. Okay, I will clear our screen and show the answers. This is basically everything that we have done. So we've looked at how 2 and 7 can be deceiving, 5 is really not necessary, and then the shortest answer here. Okay, let's move on to step 4. So reading the first and last sentences of the passage. So we've read our headings for meaning, we've looked at keywords, we've looked at the similarities and the differences. Now it is time to read the passage. Very exciting. So again, remember, you do not want to read all of this information because it'll really take up your time, it's unnecessary, and it's really not going to help you answer the questions. So instead of reading every single sentence in this paragraph and in these sections, we're just going to read the first and last sentences of each paragraph because it'll give us a general idea, and the general idea is what we need because the headings, remember, are general ideas, okay? And usually in writing, the general idea is introduced in the beginning and then it closes off the paragraph in the end. So we really shouldn't have to read in the paragraph. There could be very difficult questions where it might be necessary to skim the information in the middle, but it's highly unlikely. Also, in the very beginning of this video, when I took you through the step-by-step instruction, I said that we would make margin notes, which is an optional step, but we will do it just to give you an idea of how to best prepare for this exam. All right, so if we remember from our directions, we have section A here. A lot of students would just start reading in section A, but that is the incorrect thing to do, and it is a big time waster. Do you remember why? If we go to our previous step, remember section A has already been done for us, so we do not need to read section A. This is why reading the directions is so important, okay? So we can already skip section A. Let's go straight down to section B. Okay, and before we start reading section B, I'll just scroll down on the left-hand side so that we see our list of headings. We will refer to this list of headings when we are reading the first and last sentences of each section. Okay, so section B, I'll highlight it here. I will mark off the first sentence just so that it's easier to follow along with me, and the last sentence as well. And as I read the first and last sentences, I'm just going to underline any words that stick out to me that I remember from our step 1 and 2. Okay, let's start reading. Recently, however, attitudes towards history and the way it should be presented have altered. So I'm looking at attitudes, history, presented. Last sentence, such developments have been criticized as an intolerable vulgarization, but the success of many historical theme parks and similar locations, so I'm looking at 2 different places, suggests that the majority of the public does not share this opinion. So I'm looking at these 2 sentences, and I'm thinking that opinions or views, if I look here, are mixed because a lot of the majority of the public does not share an opinion. So I see that perhaps 2 seems to be a good option here. So I'm going to make margin notes, and the margin notes I'm making are just for me to remember, okay, when I go to solve this question, 2 is probably a good option because I'm looking at opinion, the public, and attitudes towards history. 2 is looking like a good option. Okay, so I'm going to clear the screen and make my way down to section C. Again, we'll do the same thing. I will just block it off so that it's easier to follow along with me, the first and the last. And again, I'm just going to underline. In a related development, the sharp distinction between museum and heritage sites on the one hand, and theme parks on the other, is gradually evaporating. This particular trend is regarded as one of the major developments in the presentation of natural history in the 20th century. So I see again that there are differences between the 2, yet they're growing fewer and fewer because I see it gradually evaporating. So it means the changes are decreasing. And the last sentence says major developments in the presentation of natural history. So I'm looking at a time reference. So the fact that there are fewer differences leads me to look at this right here, number 6, fewer differences between public attractions. Also the fact that you see museum, heritage sites, theme parks, these are all different types of public attractions. And so just from reading these 2 sentences, I'm going to put here VI for number 6. Again, just for me. All right, clear again. I'll make my way down to section D, second to last section. Again, I will just block it off so that it's easier for you to follow along. And we see the last sentence is pretty wordy, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, theme parks are undergoing other changes too, as they try to present more serious social and cultural issues and move away from fantasy. Okay, and then the last sentence, those who are professionally engaged in the art of interpreting history are thus in a difficult position, as they must steer a narrow course between the demands of evidence and attractiveness, especially given the increasing need in the heritage industry for income-generating activities. All right, so this is a very good example because I see evidence. It's even in quotation marks. And I remember that evidence is right here in the list of headings, number 5. So if students are not aware of the example, as you see here, so if people have not read the instructions, they might be inclined to answer V for this section. But since each heading can only be used once, you cannot use V. And this is how the test tries to trick its test takers. You see the word evidence, it's used here, but it is not the correct answer. So do not fall for these tricks. Okay, so going back to this, we see the last sentence, those who are professionally engaged. And this is a very important keyword because basically you can say people who are professionally engaged are people in charge. And so this is a really nice synonym that gives us a clue about people who work in museums and some issues. If we see here in the first sentence, some issues, some changes, these could be the commercial pressures that are put on people in charge. We see things are difficult as well. So I think these two sentences and the fact that we see professionally engaged, difficult, changes, issues, I would say this is I, and I'll make a little note in my margin here. So number 1. All right, down to section E. Again, I will just highlight for us to follow. Okay, and we'll start reading. It could be claimed that in order to make everything in heritage more real, historical accuracy must be increasingly altered. The last sentence. And no matter how exciting the result, it would contain a lot more bias than the presentations provided by experts. So this is alluding to the fact that maybe information is being understood through a different lens or in a different way. And you see the word bias, historical accuracy is altered. Looking here at the list of headings, I would say that perhaps interpreting the facts is very similar to this because as a general idea, interpreting the facts goes quite well with bias, experts, accuracy, things that can be altered. And it looks like the best option just looking at the rest of these headings. So in my margins, I'm going to put I, or 3, if you'd like to think of it that way, in the margins. Okay, I'm going to clear our screen. And now you might be thinking, okay, let's go down to section F. But if you recall, I'll go here to the previous step. If you recall from our instructions, we only have 4 questions. So that's B, C, D, and E. This question type does not require section F. And that's just because in our example, the matching headings question type has 4 questions, and this text just so happens to have more than 4 questions. And so in that case, we do not need to read section F. And this was put in as a trick because again, if candidates don't read the directions, they read everything. So they would have read section A and also section F, which is unnecessary. It takes up time. It adds other details and general ideas to confuse you. So again, we do not need to do this. Okay, so let's go down here. Let's go back up. And just to review the answers that we wrote in our margin notes, I'll go here and get my pen. Now, for number 2, section B, we said II, so to number 2, mixed reviews on current changes to museums. For number 3, which was section C, we said VI, so that's number 4. fewer differences between public attractions, okay? And then for section D, we said the answer was I, so number 1, which was commercial pressures on people in charge. And then section E, we had I, or number 3, if you'd like to think of it that way, interpreting the facts to meet visitor expectations. And again, we found these answers from looking at the first and the last sentences of the paragraphs in order to get a general idea. Let's go ahead and check our answers. And we were correct. Look at that. I'll clear our screen so it's easier to see. We were correct. And notice here how you see the explanations and where they were, and some keywords that were pulled out. So remember, only the first and last sentences were necessary in this particular example. Like I said before, if you come across a difficult question, it may be the case that you'll have to briefly skim some of these middle sentences, but more than likely that should not be the case, especially if you have successfully completed steps 1 and 2 before approaching the passage. Okay, now just to recap, these are the steps that we followed. Remember, with time and practice, you can combine steps 1 and 2. You can also combine steps 4 and 5, even though 5 is optional. Again, I would highly recommend using step 5. And now I would just like to leave you with some classic do's and don'ts for the matching headings lesson. First off, you want to read the headings first. This is very important. And you can either circle or underline any keywords that you come across. Remember, you usually don't want to underline any adjectives or unnecessary words. Then you want to read the passage's first and last sentences, thinking of the headline's keywords. Again, if you absolutely have to, if there's a very difficult question, you can skim as necessary. But as you saw in our example, the first and last sentences were sufficient. And of course, you want to write the Roman numerals in your answer booklet. Some very classic don'ts: do not waste your time reading paragraphs that are not included in the question set. You'll see usually paragraphs that may not be included. This is there to trick you into wasting time. Also, don't read the passage first, okay? Again, it's a big time waster. Don't repeat any headings for answers if not instructed to do so. So in our example, we used each heading once, and that actually helped us eliminate number 5, which was used in the example. And lastly, don't write any words in your answer booklet for this section. All right, thank you very much for joining me for this matching headings lesson. I hope that you've gained some valuable tips and some great practice for your studies. And if you'd like to look at some more reading lessons, you can visit us at www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. Again, that's www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.